Our next presentation, we have Peter Turdinle from the Leo company. He will be, he is an international-oriented entrepreneur with 20 years of experience in the software industry, including over a decade developing data-driven solutions for the pig sector with a degree in mechanical engineering. Peter is going to talk to you. Is going to talk to us about closing the loop, integrating carcass metrics with on-farm decision making. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. It's I don't have the degree in studies that you guys all have, so I'm trying to make a little bit impressive of an entrance, but thank you for that. All right, so closing the loop is actually a good one because this is the last one for today. So we're closing that loop, but also closing the loop means that we have developed a way to follow individual animals from birth all the way to slaughter. And what I want to share with you today is not so much a commercial presentation, but I more want to focus you on what are the things you have to look for and the things you have to take into account when you start looking at vast amounts of data. Because if you are looking at averages, which you would normally do in the industry, and all of a sudden you're focusing on individual animals, the amount of data is so excessively higher that you need way more tools to work with that and understand that. So I'm trying to kind of get you through a journey of what we've been through so far to see you understand that. So what you're looking at this picture right now, this is a virtual supply chain, as we call it. And what that means is that every single data point within that supply chain is connected. It means when a breeding animal is being born and it's reproducing and the animals are being sent to slaughter, all those data points are connected. So in that case, is every specific element of that supply chain is part of a whole. The interesting part of that is that that sounds very cool, but what you need to do is you need to make sure that everybody is aligned. So you're getting away from data silos and you're working into a uniform way of working. And one of the most important key factors in that is you need to have like a specific identifier that follows all the way through. So currently we're using RFID technology for that. It's the most common thing to use. And essentially, there are some new technology probably coming our way, but this is the most adopted and highly available and good priced solutions we have out there right now. So those data silos are very, you want to get away from those because it takes away some of the value of the data. And we know that because we've worked with data from other systems before, and you see how many faulty data is in there. So it's very important that you follow that all the way through. And then the closing the loop part is the last of it. So if you look at the slaughter line at the right part of it, that's actually where we read the animals at the slaughter plant, connect that information to the individual animals, so to the ear tag, and send that into the centralized database. And that centralized database element is very important because that's how you feed your information into the supply chain and to the partners. A crucial fact of this is that if you want to have a successful supply chain, you need to make sure that everybody is involved and has added value of what you're doing. Because if one of those elements stop using it, your supply chain falls apart. So the challenge of us has been, how do we engage everybody within that supply chain to keep feeding data into that supply chain and trying to get a better product? And what I'm going to tell you is not so much what we promote is, but how our customers are using it and how they are utilizing that data to make better decisions, but also using it to build a higher pork value. Right now, we're looking really at the production perspective. How can we optimize production? Realistically, we have found out, we've done some research, is that the price of a pig over the last 50 years has increased by only 80%. So the price of a pig is actually going down if you look at the economical standards we're living in right now. So that means we have done better by getting better breeds, better genetic, better management, but we haven't really able to value the pig on a higher level. So I'm also going to touch that subject in a little bit. But before we get there, a couple of my speakers before has also said that the process of collecting accurate data is absolutely essential here. And because if you use that data to make decisions, you have to make sure that it's correct. And we know that because we have implemented data from existing systems into our systems, and on average, about a minimum of 35% of those data points are wrong. One of the reasons that we did some research on that, it turns out that if you want to get good data, you need to incentivize people to do correct data. And right now, the incentivize on data capture is actually done on the production level, on your KPIs. So let's say you're going to pay someone to make a certain amount of breedings in a certain period of time. They will make sure that the system has those numbers in there, even if the numbers are wrong, a couple of days wrong. But your entire impact of that breeding date has a higher effect on all your technical KPIs later on. So you have to change your incentive structure a little bit to get those better outcomes. The second part is the raising awareness through visualization. That's a very important part, because that's the first step. Collecting is one thing, but after collecting, that's work and stuff that needs to be done, and you don't really see the results from that. When you start visualizing what you have, then all of a sudden that awareness comes. But it also creates the next need, because the minute you start creating awareness, people want to know, okay, what do I do now? So they want to have this perspective. Give me means to change this. Just telling me what to do is not good enough. And we made that mistake, because this is where when we initiated this first, this is what we did. We thought if we collect the data and we show you where your optimizations could come from, we were kind of thinking people are going to do this by themselves. And they don't, because they simply don't know how to do it. It's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's not in their SOPs. They don't understand really what is the perspective, what is the outcome. So how do we do that? So this is where some important elements come to play, and I will run into that later in the presentation. So this is important, as I said before. There are many, many ways of collecting data. There are visual systems, there are sensors, you got readers in barns, RFIDs and everything. The biggest problem you're going to have if you do not have any mean to get a consensus on what does this data apply to. So if you do measurements in a barn and you don't know which pigs have been in those conditions, there's really not a lot you can do with that. But if you can link those animals to the actual measurements and to the actual environment that they were in, you're getting way, way more insights, and you actually know the effect of certain things. We've seen this, for instance, that we had pigs coming to the slaughter line, and they did lung scoring on those pigs. And they found out that a certain batch of those pigs had bad lungs. So they run the analysis on the data, and they were finding out that these pigs are all coming from the same room. So they called up the farmer and said, there's something wrong with your ventilation in that room. And it turned to be true. So the next round, that problem was fixed and the problem was gone. So that's the level of how deep you can get into with those type of data points. But you have to make a way of working that allows you to get those data points connected in an understandable manner that everybody can work with. And then, of course, at the end of the line is that on the bottom right part is that's where they scan the animals in the slaughter line, connect that RFID tag to a Gamble ID, so they can follow it all the way through and get that individual information sent back to that cloud system. Because this is the actual problem we're facing right now, is that the averages are masking the actual problems. Every actions we are doing and we're getting some better results, we don't really know what's causing that. Is the medium group performing better? Are the lower performing pigs, are they growing, yes or no? Is the spread bigger or smaller? We don't really know that. And by looking at those individuals and really into the spread of that, you get way, way more insights on that way of working. So this is what we see now. We manage at weights, mostly at weights if we go to slaughterhouse. So we can do some kill sheet analysis. Very interesting information comes from that. You can kind of the spread and how's that being done. How do we get them into the ideal between the two red lines? What's the ideal that we want to get those pigs into? But really understanding where this is coming from, that's where the challenge starts. So we thought we need to make a different type of KPI. We need to give better understanding on what that looks like. So we kind of introduced a new way of working. But first, before you can actually do that, you need to understand that you have to let people understand that there's a very big economical impact on that. So if you look at a break-even line, this is the cost price of raising a pig. Everything, the price of the pig payout above that is margin. Anything underneath that is actually costing you money. But if you want to get that evened out, you need to have this amount of pigs to be actually sent with a profit before you're actually making a profit. And that break-even point is something we don't always have influence over. Feed prices is something we don't know. The personnel, your outbreak, anything can happen. But this break-even point is a flexible thing. But understanding which pigs comply, yes or no, gives you a very good understanding about, even before, are those viable pigs to be in my production, yes or no. So if you're really looking into the next step, what we try to do is get a new KPI introduced. We call this live growth. Live growth is nothing new from a research perspective, but from a production perspective, that's not how we manage currently. So if you look at this graph, you see the weight in kilograms and the age in days. So actually knowing on an individual animal level, how much did it grow per day, gives you huge insights on the performance of that kill sheet. So you see the mass, the two on the bottom and on the side, that's where the mass of the pigs are coming from. But you can also see if you look at those two segments there, that is low-hanging fruit. The lower left ones, they should not have been slaughtered. Other right one too. Simply by managing time differently and the way your logistics works, that's an easy thing to do, and you're already making money by doing that. So we're trying to, but how do you guide the people in that process? So that's an element that we want to go to. But right now, this is just weights. But let's say we classify that. Let's say, okay, let's put scorings to that to understand better, so where's my profitability coming from? And how do we use those data points, and how do we make those available in a production environment that you can actually work with? So the way you have to do this is you have to understand better what's going on. Because right now you see the outcome. Because all your efforts done before have a result, and you see that result. And now you need to dive into that. Okay, what is the root cause of this problem? Because we all understand, we've seen this before, a birth weight has an effect on the growth of an animal. But that's not like the only thing. And it doesn't count for all the animals. If you look at this graph on the left side, you see that there is three groups of pigs, birth weight, low, medium, high. You can see that a lot of these low birth weight pigs have a way less of a live growth. But it doesn't count for all of them, because a lot of them are just growing normally and they should be in production. So you cannot say, okay, low birth weights the pig needs to go out, because a lot of them are still very valid and very viable and just economically viable pigs. So there's no need to do that. So it's a combination of more of those factors. And that combination is, we've done a study with GD Animal Health, one of the biggest labs in Europe, and they have a data analysis part. And what we've done is we have looked at what are the most key elements of influences on growth. And mostly, how do they work together? So if a pig with a low birth weight gets sick, or comes from a different parity of a certain location, or has a different genetics, what effect would that give on production? And we found out, and one of our customers found out, through the big data analysis that they did, if we combine all the genetic lines and which one has the highest live growth outcome, they could see that certain genetic lines had saved them 5 days on feed, simply by looking at the data. So what they did, they changed the genetics and they saved 5 days on feed, simply by a simple interaction like that. But those data points, that's all nice and all, but how do we work with that? How do you make sure that people know how to work with that? So they've looked at those data points and they've implemented simple new ways of working, guiding the people better at their work. And by that, they're getting better results. This is a study done over, and this is production data. So this is not research data. This is real life production data. And looking at the results of those pigs over a couple of years of usage of our system. So over 4 million individual pigs are in this graph. And this has been corrected for maximum genetic improvement just to make sure that it's all coming from actual steps done in the production. So you could see how the slaughter age in days significantly gone down simply by making those logistical decisions, getting have better planning and better guidance on when animals should leave farms, and also implemented some other elements that could help them to get better results on that. So, what did they do? The genetic breed optimization, as I said before, saved them 5 days on feed, simply by better logistics. An early non-viable detection gave them the ability to open new markets. In Europe, the roasted pig market is not like a target market, but it's still a significant market. But it's not really seen as a market that you go for. It's like it happens and then you just take action on it. But right now, with this data, they can already predict which pigs need to go to that specific market because they're not economically viable enough to actually go into full production. Optimizing sow herd management. This is a sow card from our system. So what we do is in every parity, you can follow all the data elements, but we also link the performance of the offspring to the specific parity of the sow. So the slaughter results we get, we link that to the individual sow. So your breeding decisions have gone up dramatically. So with making those better breeding decisions, they had a higher accuracy on the breeding, and you can see that they're growing in parity. So they're not saying goodbye to a sow after parity 5. If the sow is economically viable enough, they just keep it around until it reaches a certain threshold, and then they get rid of it. So the optimization of that is helping them a lot. This is we call it performance-based pig sorting. The way this is done, and we are doing pilots with this right now, is if we feed all this data into a prediction algorithm, and that prediction algorithm tells you when the animal's being born and the birth rate is being registered, we know from all the historical data in that database and all the elements that influence that over life, we can tell them right now, this animal needs to be sorting in different pen locations, and they're going to be feeding in different feed rations. And by the data shown to that in the pre-trials we did, we can see huge savings on that, an increase in slaughter weights, but also the daily gains is getting higher and the feed conversions are way, way better. So you can have cheaper feed to pigs that grow fast and more expensive feed, maybe to the slower ones, to get more uniformity in there. So that's what we're looking at right now. That's a completely different way of working and operating, but it's still, this is where they believe the profit is going to come from. So this is an example of how to guide people through data. So what you're seeing here is a very simple yes or no. This pig qualifies yes or no. And this is an example of where it's been done in a trial where cameras who are giving individual weights to our system, combining with all the prediction algorithms that we have, giving them this is the right time, most economical time for this pig to go to slaughter. And once you get into the barn, and that's the most crucial element of this, is you have to make sure that you guide people where they work. And do not underestimate the power of the little dopamine shot if a computer system tells you you're doing something right. if you get a big green check mark, you're doing something right. It helps you to be more engaged in the work you do. It helps you to, yeah, I know this pig is right, and scan it, and it's correct. That's a very powerful thing. It's engaging, and it also helps the younger generation to be more engaged in the industry. And also, you need less qualified personnel to make those decisions, because those are very, very difficult to get. People knowing the exact slaughter weights or knowing the exact criteria for a selection of a breeding or a fattening animal. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's going to get more difficult. So this is a very important element of what we do, and we believe that this is where the future lies. You need to facilitate all the elements that you can, all the data elements you can get, but essentially at the end of the day, you need to give it back to someone who knows what to do and at what time in the day. So now we look at the value of a pig. This is all optimization of the production process, highly important, but with traceability comes another thing, and that is insights. Things you can prove, things you can, claims you can give to the food chain. A very clear example is antibiotic-free meat. This customer has been using this systematic to sell specific value parts to countries where they need those, where they're willing to pay for those claims. So they have a specific line set up. This is an Italian company. They're making these specific pura, but that means there is no antibiotics in that meat. And they import those hams from the Netherlands, and they sell them as Italian purebred, no, not purebreds, but Italian meat with no antibiotics. Very important. Those are markets that are very difficult to get if there is no real product, no real concept to tell you. So that increased their markets and opened their markets, and especially, you know, with the economical situation right now going on, it's very difficult to continue your logistics to all these countries. It's difficult to get that sustainable. So if you open more markets, you can diversify your operation and be better at and be more flexible to the future. A very interesting study they've done together with SIVA. They have done excessive long scoring at the slaughter plant, linked to the individual animals, and know exactly where they came from. And what they found out through their study is that because of the bacterial loads in those pigs, that an insanely, a very high impact on the shelf life of that meat. So by knowing this up front, if these animals, through observations and measurements in environments, you can already segregate those animals at slaughter. So that means you can build new concepts out of that. So longer shelf life pigs or whatever is important to that. And there's a lot of those things, those proof elements come in our way. In Europe, for sure, it's going to be law. And in the US, who knows? And the full inventory visibility gave them a lot more freedom to operate on the market. You have to understand, if you're working in a digital supply chain, you know when an animal's being born, you know the age of the animal, and through the prediction algorithms, you can also know when an animal's being done. So you know month up front what your supply chain looks like. You can act on that. You can help them in getting those fulfillments done and get the sales team equipped to go out and sell this earlier. So this has been a huge win for them in that part too. Withdrawal time compliance is right now in Europe a very big subject. We used to have the food chains in the Netherlands used to be, if you comply as a farmer, say I'm complying to withdrawal times and just sign for that, that used to be enough. Right now it's not. If they find any trace of antibiotics in the specific meat that's been sent, you need to tell them and prove to them through data that you actually were compliant. So a signature is not enough anymore. So, and through this, the way it's been done right now is when these animals are being loaded on the truck and an animal's still within the withdrawal time, you get an active alert, and the animal has to be moved out of that truck. If the animal does get on the truck and it goes to the slaughterhouse is being notified, and they take the animals out of the supply chain. So this compliance helps you to secure food safety, and it's way better to export your meat. Animal welfare is an important element that we see in Europe. They are rewriting laws right now in the EU to use a single identifier for an animal. Normally, if an animal is in the sow herd, the sow unit, that's where it gets its identifier. And when it's moved to a different location, it needs to have another identifier. And right now, with the digital supply chain, that's not needed anymore, because you have a digital footprint of that animal everywhere it's going. So that means that there is no more extra ears in extra holes in the ears, or slap mark them with all that stuff, because that's going to be absolutely forbidden. And with this type of technology, they don't need to do this anymore. So they can sell this as a higher animal welfare animal. The reason why it's important is maybe a single consumer wouldn't ask for that. But I recently talked to McDonald's, and they said to me, so we want to have high animal welfare animals with a low carbon footprint, but they need to be non-antibiotic. Okay, so, but they will never say, but we do not say you cannot use antibiotics, because from a welfare perspective, an animal sick needs to be treated, right? That makes sense. We just don't want them, so we want to separate them out. So by following an individual animal on a carcass level, you can see how long it's been on a location, what feed it's been given, and when it's being slaughtered. So you can have a very detailed carbon footprint calculation based on that. So you can differentiate on high and low footprint animals in that supply chain. And that helps them to prove to a McDonald's or a larger food group that we are compliant to that, and we can deliver you those animals. So this is a summary of kind of what carcass value-based RFID traceability looks like. Proof of vaccination. In some countries, that is important, and the vaccination can also do a claim on certain diseases that they didn't have, and that links back to the shelf life discussion. Location history, genetic background. This is an animal-proven genetics. Like they're having these problems right now in Spain, where they have these very high-value Iberian hams that they cannot really fully follow. And with technology like this, they can prove this is actually 100% an Iberian pig being raised in that location, came back at this date, so it meet the time requirements, it meet everything. Disease history, withdrawal compliance, as I said before, and the footprint calculation, which is going to be, at least in Europe, is a very big thing coming right now. I don't know how that is in US, but in Europe, that's a large thing. So my go-to line here is the individual traceability connects farm practice to animal performance, and you're gaining, by looking at individual data on a continuous level, you're creating a continuous improvement platform that helps you to grow into the future. Thank you so much.
And this moment, I'm gonna call my speakers so we can start the panel for questions. Can you use that?
I have a question for Peter. Yeah. Yeah. So, you mentioned about the Leo system, right? So I understand that it is widely used in Europe. Is that correct? Because what I'm thinking is that I was wondering how many like pigs are using this Leo system, and what are the added costs for having this system for each pig, and what are the labors that it added? Because you mentioned there are so many benefits, like how many percentage improvement. So I want to know the how many pigs used and what are the costs for that, including labor.
The labor cost is the same, so you don't need any extra labor to work with a system like this. Mostly the way we've been implementing it, and it's kind of a workflow system. So you capture data at the source. You don't need to go back and fill it in. So there is no extra labor needed for that. So the cost of it is the electronic ear tag, and of course there's a little on top fee of that for the software uses. But that's about the investment that you, and of course you need like a reader and stuff like that in the barn. But that's about the investment that you do. The biggest implementations are indeed in Europe. We are currently 25 countries in the world right now where we are actively implementing Leo. And we are at I think 11 million pigs right now in our database. So it's we're in the beginning, but it's a scale up where we are currently at. Yeah.
I had a question on the Leo system as well. When you have that, if you're a feeder pig are producing isoweans and you're selling those, if there's a sales transaction, is there the ability to transfer that data, or how does that work?
That's a very good question. Thank you so much. So the way it's been done, if you transfer a pig throughout the system, you can choose to share the data with the next owner. But there needs to be a consensus on that, because you cannot just share data because it's not yours to share. So there is a sharing method within Leo. If a pig changes ownership, data is automatically transferred with that, and you can, as a farmer, you can choose which data points you want to send with that pig.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or a comment. I think we ought to put all 5 of you in a hotel somewhere for about a year and pull it all together. Have so much capability of collecting individual data and pulling all that together, but modeling it, Christian, needs to be done. David, putting it, in a form that can be used on a farm needs to be done. How do we approach it as an industry of pulling all the pieces together? They all exist, but I like the idea of the smart farm, but at the same time, how do we pull together a vision where you can just put it all together?
So my personal opinion for that is we have to develop ways of collecting data, cleaning data, modeling the data, but I think the most important part is the delivery of the system or making operational. Because then, I think that's why I like the connection we're here, like theoretical part, but also for me, the most complicated aspect is how do we sell the idea, or how do we sell the system? How we do make it operational? Because I think in this room, there'll be a lot of data, and then we might have great ideas. The problem is, to me, I personally feel the disconnection of how I can learn from Peter, for example. And then it's more like my question for him is, how we can improve the curriculum, or how we to improve our pipeline of knowledge creation in order to have a closer collaboration.
The way that I see it is, you have to start with like a foundation where all data points come together, and you need to make it accessible. For instance, if we look at Topics, we have Topics has a protocol called ePICS, which is an electronic way of exchanging data with the Topics database. That means everything you collect once is automatically shared to Topics if you're a Topics farm. And Topics has that data and does its analysis and gives the breeding values back into Leo. So that's a perfect example of how you can work together. But what we don't have enough of, and I think that you're absolutely right, is that to give the accessibility to do the data analysis and give that feedback back to the user. Okay, this is what you should do, and I think we have to be way better at that, and that we have to have collaboration that allow you to link into that and make sure that the data has to be anonymized, so you cannot know where it's coming from, but you have to work with the data to understand it. So I definitely believe that it's doable, but first of all, we had to get rid of the silos that we're working on and get it all mutually collected. And then the possibilities, in my opinion, are endless. And I think and as my example, we're already doing it.
Since you mentioned, I'm gonna just make a comment, Eric, back to you. I think we have examples on how that can happen. To me, Prosper and the work Dr. Linares, Dr. Mahales are doing is a good example. We started working with them, and it was it's a long process, right? We understand how our data streams work into a production system. I think the next step needs to happen, though, is to make it more smart and to adapt it to the different types of systems we have, right? Because it will take maybe 6 months to a year to try to process and integrate the data from a production system, but then it gets limited to very few production systems. So the next step to me is what Christian mentioned, is creating a different curriculum, creating different background into our students, that then we create smart systems that then capture automatically that data. But those will be examples. Do we have more questions? Yes.
Yeah. Regarding traceability in swine production, thinking on food safety, will blockchain be an option for Leo to work on and ensuring the traceability of food safety?
Blockchain is a method of transactional truth. And from that perspective, yes, we already interface with blockchain solutions right now. We have to be a little bit careful that blockchain by itself is not the answer to traceability, because a blockchain is a non-controlled environment. So there is no regulation on when is a blockchain actually valid, yes or no. Most of the blockchains are being manipulated, putting this in a bad way, by the food groups, and they're determining the rules of engagement. So they are determining the transactional truth elements. So it's not necessarily good for the farmer, for the production entities. It's mostly dominated by a certain factor. So if we can get consensus about everybody understanding what blockchain means, then yes, we can definitely, we're already doing it. But I think we have to be careful that blockchain gives a false sense of security, which is not necessarily true. I think we have to be, it's a very good transactional truth method. It's not necessarily transparency in the supply chain. So that's my only, and definitely use it, but we have to be careful on who's controlling it.
With the animal, is the data, who owns the data? Maybe is the
Yeah, that's a very fair question. If you look at legally, you cannot own data. Data is a non-tangible, and by law, you cannot own a non-tangible. By data law, you do have the right to control that data because you initiated that data point. So that means a farmer, the person or the person owning the pig, generating the data, is the owner of that data. Yeah, and he or she can choose to share that data downstream, but there needs to be a certain purpose behind it. So between every data sharing, there is a purpose document stating we're sharing data for this goal and this goal only. So you cannot like go out and sell it. So there are standard contracts in Leo that allow you to do that. But it's the ownership. We don't own any data. Leo doesn't own anything. We just facilitate in the system. The ownership is always where the data initiates, but there's rights to share and to cooperate with that.
I have maybe a final question, and this is for Christian. I find it very interesting that we now have the computing power to take experimental questions to the field. And so you showed the example on different diets provided to birds in this case. I do find it, though, that we have to be careful on understanding how we set those type of experiments. So is there a guidance on how many treatments do we have to provide and how variable they have to be to determine a better answer, a better pattern, right? Because you mentioned variation is important, so how variable those diets have to be.
So what I'm working with is, it depends on, so first I would say I try to, when I do data analysis or when I design experiments, I try to understand what are my assumptions. I mentioned that we make assumptions because that's good enough for our question. The other one is because we don't have the technology for doing it, and the other one is when the assumptions are embedded in theory. So when we make decisions, there are some assumptions that we're doing without maybe explicitly knowing it. So for example, the concept of requirement. Do animals have requirements? In my opinion, they don't have requirements. We have requirements because we have to pay our loans and we have to make money. Animals have responses. So if you are going to analyze data in the context of responses, then maybe the optimal of the system is way far from what we consider requirements, and that's what actually we are seeing. So the optimal of the system, and also in the conversations that we have today, is like sometimes you analyze the individual pig, or you see averages. And what we've seen is averages, or any metric is a compression of information. And that compression of information always hides something. An average includes mortality, for example. There is a survivor bias. When you analyze only the survivors, you're gonna see something. If you, instead of using averages, use cumulative sums, you see another thing. So it's kind of not only how you design the experiment, it's how you're gonna see the system. What are the assumptions? Well, the assumption is average is a good metric. We know, I think there are a lot of arguments saying that average daily gain is not the best indicator of profitability, for example. Then we're gonna say, okay, we're assuming average daily gain is the main driver of profit, maybe not. We assume that the requirement is the optimal for the animal, maybe not. And to me, the first question is to check all the assumptions that are implicit in my decision of what tool or how I'm gonna handle the data, right? Because I think there is no such a thing as raw data. Raw was collected with some assumptions behind it. When you analyze that, it's gonna return the assumptions you had from the beginning. So it's kind of more than what model is gonna use is as you see what are the assumptions of the model, and then go, and that will limit how you see the system. And then important things we're doing with Dr. Pedro is using this system thinking approach and complex system theory and trying to go far from the previous assumptions, because I think that's limiting the way we study systems. That's a long answer, but I don't know if that makes some sense.
Getting there.
Do you want to add something? No?
Any final question for our speakers? Nope. If not, let's thank our speakers one more time. Thank you for your time this afternoon. And thank you to you, and that concludes our session. Have a good afternoon.